let's discuss another useful tool, which is called workload analysis. We're going to start with a short definition, and then I'm going to show you a short example. So by workload analysis, we mean a type of analysis where we try to estimate how much work has to be put to finish specific task or project. When it comes to workload, we can express it in two things, so in man-hours or in the so-called full-time equivalents, or FTE for short. In a minute, I'm going to show you how to calculate that. In workload analysis, we not only try to estimate how much work has to be put to a specific task or project, but also we have to compare it with available resources and obviously make a certain decision on whether we continue with a project or not. On top of that, we may be sometimes forced to add resources, or hopefully in some cases remove resources because maybe the workload is not so big and we can have fewer people doing specific thing. As we said, workload can be expressed either in man-hours or in full-time equivalents, and let's have a look how those two things are being calculated. So by man-hours, we mean obviously the total time that has to be devoted to finishing a specific project or a task. So we look at the number of people involved in a specific task or a project. Then we look at the duration of this activity, and then we also look at how many hours they have to devote per day of their involvement. So if we have 3 people, then the project takes 10 days and every day they work 8 hours. It means that in total, we would have to devote 240 man-hours. So in other words, man-hours tells us how much total time has to be spent on the project by all the team members. Now, sometimes we would rather look at something different, so the full-time equivalent. Now let's have a look at full-time equivalents. Full-time equivalents tells us how many people we would need to finish the work expressed in man-hours, provided they work on the specific task full-time. So we look at the man-hours of the work that we have to do, and we simply divide it by number of hours provided by one full-time employee. If we look at our example where we had to finish 240 man-hours of work, if we put people to work on this full-time, we would need 1.4 full-time equivalent, so 1.4 FTE. As you might remember, there were 3 people. However, if we express this in full-time employment, this would mean that it's 1.4. In other words, the very same work could have been done by 1.4 people if they worked for the whole month and they were spending 168 hours on the project. Full-time equivalents are extremely useful due to the fact that in many cases you have people working part-time on different projects, and therefore looking at the people working is not sufficient. It's usually better to also look at the full-time equivalents. There's also another way to look at the full-time equivalents. You simply look at the percentage of the time spent on a specific project by the people involved. So if we had 2 people, person A and B, and we knew what percentage of their time they spent on the project, we could calculate how many FTEs this project involves. So, for example, if person A devotes 0.2 FTE, so 20% of his time are spent on the project, and if person B spends 70% of his time on the project, so it's 0.7 FTE, we can say that this project involves 0.9 FTE, so almost one full-time person is working on this project, although in reality we have 2 people involved. However, they are in a different way involved in the project. Now, let's have a look how we can use that in practice. So we have here example of a project management office where we've got 4 people and 4 different projects. So here you can see what percentage of their time they spent on each and every project. As you can see, they're fully occupied. And for example, Anna is spending 20% of her time on project 1, 40% of the project 2, whereas John is spending 50% of his time on project 1 and 50% on project 4. If we sum it up, we'll get that on project 1, we have 1.2 FTE involved. For project 2, we have a half a FTE involved. For project 3, 1/4 of the FTE, and project 4 are 2 FTE. So this would be the first part of the workload analysis. This shows us how much resources we have allocated for each and every project. In workload analysis, we would also like to look at how many FTEs we actually need to finish this project by the set deadline. And we do it on the second slide. So for example, for project 1, we need 2 FTEs, but actually we have allocated 1.2. For project 2, we have a very same situation. So we have a fewer people allocated than required. And the same goes for project 3. A bit different story is on project 4. Here it seems that we have put too many people given how many we require. So out of this, you can say that we would most likely be late on those 3 first projects and we should finish faster project 4. So if you were to manage this team, you would most likely have to move some of the people from project 4 to, for example, project 2, and then reduce the number of projects. So instead of doing project 1 and 3, most likely you should concentrate on just one of them. So that's in short how you do this workload analysis. In short, you look at how much work has to be done, and then you check the resources devoted to the work, and on the basis of that, you decide what to do. The workload you can measure either in FTE as we have shown here, or in man hours.